I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the continuing firestorm set up by the Israeli Knesset when it passed a new basic law entitled Israel as the National State of the Jewish People. If you were with us last time, you heard we were speaking with one of the leading journalists in the state of Israel, Haviv Rettig Gur, who writes for the Times of Israel. He's a leading journalist, a political journalist, and he's an analyst who brings unusual nuance to bear. And one of the things that we try to do here on JBS is not only talk about what are American Jews saying about what's going on in Israel, but what are Israelis thinking and saying, and how do they feel? And so we constantly turn to Haviv Rettig Gur for his insight and analysis. And Haviv, thank you so much for being up late at night and staying with us to talk more about this basic law.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. In our first discussion, you made a side comment I wish you'd amplify. You pointed out to us that we should understand the basic law as it now appears with its 11 amendments is really a distillation of a law that evolved since 2007 was when it began to be discussed. And that for Israelis, for you, for those who are sophisticated in the political process in Israel, in some way the reaction is not simply to the actual text of this basic law, but to the entire history of the discussion and evolution of the law. And what you said to us last time was, the law started out as a pretty centrist law, but over time it moved more and more to the right. I want you to tell us, when did it move and why?
The law has come back every couple of years, since about 2009, 2010, and it keeps coming back it keeps being brought back by lawmakers who themselves are moving more and more to the right, which is to say, it was an idea that in its original first versions, it had members from the Labour Party, from the centrist Kadima Party, who were co-sponsors. And the goal was to just give a sort of a broad outline. Israel has been writing its constitution piecemeal, passing, I think there are now 13 basic laws. It a little bit depends what you define a basic law, but there's about 13 basic laws that talk about, there's a basic law of the judiciary, a basic law of the government, a basic law of the Knesset, two basic laws that give us rights. The basic law of freedom of vocation is about Israelis' economic rights, property rights, and a basic law of human dignity and liberty is sort of more fundamental rights, right to dignity, right to privacy, things like that. And those are the basic laws that exist, and there's no place in that sort of piecemeal. Each one is written over a few years, and suddenly comes up to the Knesset and is voted. Israelis didn't have a constitutional convention where they wrote a constitution. It really is a constitution written as if it's only amendments, right? It's only things that come piece by piece. And this question of what is a Jewish state? It says Jewish and democratic in the Declaration of Independence. And in various places in Israeli law, it also talks about Israel being a Jewish state. For example, you can't run for the Israeli Knesset if you want to destroy the state's Jewish identity. Now, there are parties, that's not really enforced. There are parties in the Knesset who don't believe Israel should be a Jewish state. For example, Balad, which is the Palestinian Nationalist Party. But there is in the basic law of the Knesset this mention of Jewish state. But nobody really knew or knows even maybe today, despite the passage of the law yesterday, what that means. And this law came to say what it actually means. And it has moved rightward because the people who have felt the need for this law, there's been a huge sort of, I think, campaign on the Israeli left against the passage of a law like this for reasons that we can get into. And so there's been a lot of political concern in the center and in the left about passing such a law, even though there used to be a lot of support. And so it's more and more right-wingers who are on board with it.
Yeah, by the way,
now we have a right-wing coalition. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So take a moment. why does the left not want in Israel not want there to be a basic law? There's nothing in this basic law that talks about how Judaism should be practiced, except that it says Shabbat will be the day of rest, and the Knesset will determine what Shabbat law is in the state of Israel. But other than that, it doesn't talk about orthodoxy, it doesn't talk about the chief rabbinate, it doesn't talk about marriage, divorce, burial, none of that. So for people to say to say this defines what a Jewish state is once and for all, that seems to me to be simplistic. There is so much more to what anybody means by a Jewish state than is described in this basic law. This is just a bare bones skeleton. But
Well,
I want you to explain.
Yeah, it's a bare bones skeleton. But on the left, the argument. First of all, there was a mention. There was in Article 11, a previous Article 11. Now Article 11 says how many MKs you need to vote to amend the law. But that used to be Article 12. And there was an Article 11 that did talk about, Jewish law. And Jewish law specifically, talking about the court needing to rule according to Jewish law when there's no clear precedent or existing civil law. Was something explicitly mentioned in the law until a month ago.
But it's not there. But it's not there now.
It's not there now. But the fact that the authors of the bill and that it's run by the right, and that there's plenty of people on the right willing to push that kind of a thing in, it creates a lot of distrust on the left. Mm-hmm. I would say that the most powerful criticism of this law inside Israel, and sort of in terms of Israeli-Jewish debate, internal debate, there are reasons for Arabs to be concerned with this law that are very different. Inside the Jewish debate, it's simply a question of trust. The law in the end has been pushed through. 62 MKs voted for it. That's the slimmest of majorities. And in the end, it was pushed through by a right-wing coalition. You have seen concern and really a decision not to vote for the law by Druze MKs. These are non-Jewish, Arabic-speaking, utterly loyal, IDF-serving a community that feels like this law, there's no technical statement in the law that takes away from them any right whatsoever.
Yes.
Not even Arabic, nothing. There's nothing that they actually lose. But it's a statement that feels exclusionary. And that feeling, the sort of cultural echo of the law, to these Druze who the right wing is very proud of these people. This is a minority that is utterly, its fate is. They actually draft into the Israeli army. They don't just volunteer. They are like the Jews, and they serve alongside the Jews. And my platoon commander when I was in the army, in the infantry, was Druze. And so we have this sort of bond, really a blood bond between Jews and Druze, and they're concerned with this law. And it's about some of these cultural reasons, trusting the right wing.
I understand, but I want to make sure everybody understands what you're saying. Haviv Rettig Gur is talking about the Druze community, which are basically Bedouins. In many instances, they are in the north, sometimes they're in the south. And what Haviv is saying is the Druze community in Israel, which is not Jewish, has been extraordinarily loyal to the Jewish state, and as Haviv points out, has willingly been willing to be serving in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And are you telling me that I could read statements by Druze leaders in some way expressing concern about this basic law?
Yes. Someone named Akram Chasson, members of Knesset who are Druze, including one in the Israel Beitenu party, which is a right-wing Jewish party, and this person is a member of Knesset from them. And these people have actually, in the actual vote, despite the fact that they have to vote with the coalition because of how Israeli politics works, they actually abstained. They broke coalition discipline and abstained. One of the people who campaigned against the law in the Knesset is the father. I don't know if our viewers remember, but there was a lot of rioting last year around the Temple Mount after 3 Israeli police officers were murdered in a terror attack on the Temple Mount. And those police officers were Druze police officers, and one of the murdered officers, their father is a man. All of his sons have served in the Israeli army, and he came to the Knesset. Someone who every Israeli patriot respects profoundly, who was given a child on the altar of Israel's security, and begged in the committee meetings of the Constitution and Law Committee in the Knesset for this law not to go forward. So we have seen concerns about this law on the left, on the center, and from minorities that are not part of the Jewish-Arab fight. Mm-hmm. And so there is a sense of a lack of trust. The right wing ended up pushing this alone, and other groups, even if they'll agree with 94% of the bill's actual words, they don't trust the people who pushed it. And that really is, I think, the deepest problem with the law. It's you shouldn't define the identity of your country as a partisan act. Mm-hmm. And this law, we have to now see if it remains partisan and in 10 years ultimately is overturned, or if it's something that, despite being passed in a partisan way, becomes part of the state's sort of DNA and people come to accept it. It really could go either way.
Okay, well said. When we were on last, we talked about Article 1, but there are some other articles in this basic law which really need your clarification. I want to go to Article 3, and Sloan, let's put Article 3 up. It deals with the sensitive issue of Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. It states that Jerusalem, complete and united, is the capital of Israel. Haviv, what's your analysis of Article 3?
People on the left have been worried about this article. They say that if we have a peace treaty with the Palestinians that involves splitting Jerusalem, which is quite likely if we get to a peace treaty, whether we get to a peace treaty or not is something else, then we will have to overturn this constitutional basic law in order to be able to do that splitting of Jerusalem. And therefore, this is an obstacle in the path of peace. I just want to point out this is nothing of the sort. It already will take a Knesset vote with a very large majority to split Jerusalem. That is already on the law books. In fact, you require more member of Knesset votes to do the splitting of Jerusalem under the Jerusalem law. We have a separate Jerusalem law than you do here, which is to say a bill that amends this and a bill that amends that, if you can pass the change to the Jerusalem law to do such a peace treaty, which was on the books before this law passed, then you automatically have already changed this. So the Jerusalem thing looks problematic to people who aspire to a two-state solution, and I just want to assure you it is not. Or put another way, it is no more problematic than it was yesterday.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's go to Article 4, which talks about language. And, of course, up until this law was passed, the languages, the formal languages of Israel were Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And signs all over Israel were in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And now the notion is that Arabic will no longer be a state language, and on many signs you'll only see Hebrew and English. What's your sense of this, Haviv?
So here, this is an important point. I want to say something in favor of the bill and then something against. In favor of the bill, viewers should read Section C of this article.
This clause, I'll read it, but wait. This clause does not harm the status given to the Arabic language before this law came into effect. And when I first read it, Haviv, it seemed to be in some way disingenuous. It would seem to me that if I'm an Arab Israeli, and my language has been a state language, to tell me that now it isn't is in some way a slap in the face.
Exactly. Now, isn't that interesting? You read it and you said, "Oh, this is an analysis," but don't forget you're reading a constitution. When it says in there, it's not really harm; it's more diminish. When it says in there, this article does not change what the de facto status that Arabic has had until today, That's not an explanation of the article. That is an order by a constitutional law, which is to say this article is not permitted to change anything that has been until today. This Arabic article, just for my point in favor of the law, does nothing. In the Hebrew isn't even defined in the first part of the thing as an official language. The word official, lishmi, doesn't even appear. It simply says Hebrew is the language of the state. There isn't even a category called official in this law. And then it says Arabic has a special status. And then it says nothing that has been will change. So what is this article? What is it there for? What is it there for if it changes nothing? What is it there for if it doesn't even use the word official at any part of it? And here comes both the people who defend the law and the people who criticize the law. The point here is Arabic has never really been an official language of the State of Israel in law. Judges in jurisprudence, in their judicial rulings, have ruled that Arabic is an official language in the sense that the state has to be accessible in the Arabic language. An Arab-speaking citizen of Israel has to be able to go to, to the welfare ministry or to the motor vehicle bureau and be able to conduct their daily business in Arabic. 20% of the country speaks Arabic. That's a completely reasonable demand of the state. And that's what judges have ruled. And so there's been a de facto bilingual state, Arabic and Hebrew. All official documents have been accessible in it. But in fact, Arabic has not been, by law, an official language. Technically, this upgrades the status of Arabic. Arabic is now in a constitution of the State of Israel, inasmuch as there is one, has a special status. For the first time, Arabic is more than English. Russian is spoken by 10% of Israelis. Arabic is more than Russian. Don't have a special status. Hebrew is the language of the state. There's a game happening here, a game that is sort of textual and contextual. Now, people who criticize this law point to Section C that says, by the way, nothing is allowed to change just because we just said that Hebrew is the language of the state and Arabic is special, and nothing is allowed to change. Well, if nothing is allowed to change, why did you have to make these declarations? And that's why they point out to this Arabic thing as being a sign that there is some kind of a racist element, some kind of a telling Arabs, putting Arabs in their place element, and ethnic tensions are being expressed here. There's a complicated game being played in Article 4. It's not simple. It's not direct. The critics have a point, and the defenders have a point. To define Hebrew is also symbolic. It's all sorts of different things. So there's complexity here. Nothing that Arabs had access to in Arabic. The street signs, for example.
Yes.
What about? Will remain.
So when we read,
the state is constitutionally required to keep it up.
Okay, Haviv, when we read in some major American Jewish publications that street signs are already being changed, are we misled?
Yes.
Very interesting.
In fact, if they are being changed, they're a violation of a new constitutional law, which says that nothing can be changed.
Fascinating. All right, so that's Article 4. What about Article 7? Article 7 talks about Jewish settlements. It affirms the right of Jewish settlement. It says that Israel basically encourages settlement expansion as a national value, Haviv. What's been the Israeli reaction to that on the street, and what insight can you give us here?
7 is the most controversial part for Israelis, and it's not for what's in there, but for what's missing. There used to be, up until last week, Article 7b. And Article 7b said that small communities are allowed to define themselves, to separate themselves. Some people have unkindly used the word segregate themselves. They're allowed to, now, by ethnicity, by religion, by culture. It didn't even limit the ability of small, not big cities, A big city like Tel Aviv can't say, I don't know what, Arabs or Russian immigrants or Ethiopian immigrants can't come in. But if you're a small village, then you would have had a constitutional right to say, we are a particular kind of Jewish religious village. We want to be ultra-Orthodox. We don't want modern Orthodox here. Different groups, cultural subgroups, were allowed to create these tiny separate communities and discriminate over who comes in. Now, that was in there until last week. And that caused a huge uproar in Israel. Demonstrations that brought together Ethiopian Jewish Israelis, Russian immigrants, Russian-speaking immigrants who are Jewish, some not Jewish, Arabs who said, this is about Jews not wanting Arab neighbors. It was a legal right to discriminate, and it came from a particular vision of the right wing. This is something that the far right pushed into the bill, and that was pulled out of the bill, and with a lot of anger and negotiations in the Knesset. But this is a place where now what's left is that the state values Jewish settlement. The state values Jewish settlement is a 100-year-old idea that Jews should live in the state of Israel and settle in the state of Israel from all over the world. It doesn't give any specifications. In other words, this is not talking about settlements in the West Bank. This is talking about, broadly speaking, that the Jewish right to settle in the land of Israel is something that the state values. It's not that nobody quite knows what it means because it's written very vaguely. It's intentionally vague so that everyone can claim that it means whatever they want it to mean. But here you really saw in Israel the biggest fight, and the fight over values, the really powerful fight over values, happened in Article 7.
Yeah. By the way, had paragraph B been included in that article, it would have been a horror, but it wasn't. And it's interesting to hear you describe the extent to which the Israeli people seem to be very, very aware of the discussion about this law, that the basic law was coming. They were aware of its evolving over the years. Very often we see something in America and Israeli Jews are oblivious to it. Haviv, it doesn't sound like this is an instance where Israelis were oblivious. It sounds to me as if Israelis were very much focused on what would be the outcome of this basic law, and that the Israeli people did have a hand in shaping it.
I would agree with that. It reflects a certain consensus. Again, it reflects a certain consensus on the right. Because the left didn't support it and didn't vote for it, it also isn't really represented in it.
I understand.
By the way, for example, the Jewish settlement question, it could have been in there. There were political battles that pulled it out, but it could have been in there. It was in there last week. Mm-hmm. And if that means that, for example, someone at the American Jewish Committee then steps back and says, whoa, wait a second, even if now the text is kind of okay, the original intent, because this actual discrimination was in there until last week, maybe the original intent is discriminatory, maybe the whole thing is tainted. Mm-hmm. The current text does not have discrimination in any way, but I respect people who say, but it's a wink at discrimination. I respect people who look at this and have real problems with it, even though the current text, the one that actually passed, and I'm willing to argue on any specific article you raise, really is not discriminatory.
Okay, but I want to push you for a moment because you're usually very careful about not giving your opinion. It sounds like this time you're telling me that Haviv Rettig Gur sides with those who are critical, especially because they saw an earlier intent. Have I defined you properly?
I am very, very critical with the process, the way this was done, and I'm very concerned about the partisanship. Yes.
Okay.
We don't have a constitutional process like you do in the United States where 3/4 of state legislatures have to vote something in. We don't have a way of ensuring that a constitution reflects the mainstream.
Okay.
And this is a constitutional law passed in a deeply partisan way.
Okay. By the way,
partisan vote.
It seems as if Jewish life everywhere, certainly here in America, is very partisan, and nobody speaks to each other anymore. They don't want to hear each other, and it sounds to me like the partisan divide that is ripping American Jewry apart, Haviv, ripping it apart, is being experienced in some way in Israel as well. Am I correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We are very deeply divided on some fundamental questions.
In general, are you concerned? You think, again, it's hard to ask this question because you've already said there's so much partisanship. But if one were on the streets of Israel, are Israelis concerned with this? And the Israeli people voted in Likud. By the way, we should point out, my understanding is Benny Begin, Menachem Begin's son, who is in Likud, did not vote for this basic law, correct?
Yeah, he's been one of the most ferocious critics of it, and actually argues, really the worst. He says the worst things about this law.
Yes, so that I'm not sure even it has universal support on the right. Maybe there are those on the right who, there may be very few of them, but who see the process more as you do, or more concerned about the process. My last question for you, and we only have about a minute left. What's it going to mean when all the sound and fury dies down? Haviv, in 1 minute, what does the passage of this basic law mean for the state of Israel?
Very little. A decade ago, it means very little legally. A decade ago, about 2 decades ago, the Supreme Court made a ruling in the Bar Ilan case. Bar Ilan is a big street in Jerusalem that passes through an ultra-Orthodox Haredi neighborhood, and there was a suit that demanded that the street be closed on the Sabbath. And Supreme Court Chief Justice Aaron Barak at the time, a secular left-winger, ruled that because Israel is a Jewish state, Shabbat is a value, and if Shabbat is a value, we can have a community that is deeply observant, close a major thoroughfare that passes right through their middle on the Sabbath. And the reasoning he gave was the Jewish nature of the state of Israel, the Jewish character and identity of the state of Israel. So the Supreme Court has already validated the question of a Jewish state as validating, for example, allowing the state to enforce certain rights of Jewish communities as Jewish communities in existing law without having this thing that they, to look back at and rule against. So this law adds very, very little in terms of Supreme Court rulings, in terms of the judiciary.
Okay.
The main thing this law does is make a statement, and a statement is a big cultural event.
Okay.
And there, in the culture, in the question of Jews versus Arabs, and all of these internal battles, there it could have a very profound effect. 15
seconds, Haviv. Should American Jewry be up in arms over this basic law?
American Jewry should learn it deeply. I think it's up in arms over the wrong things. Article 6, the diaspora, means that the state of Israel is committing to American Jewry and therefore also committing to accept American Jewry in its constitution, i.e., if you're the reform movement and you're concerned about the Western Wall, it is now arguable, and you should take to the Supreme Court the argument that the state of Israel is now constitutionally required to welcome you to the Western Wall. Read Article 6.
Beautifully. You're fabulous, Haviv. I can't thank you enough giving us 2 programs here, helping us understand. You always do. You know I'm going to chase you all the time. I appreciate the fact that you wait up late at night to be on JBS. You are doing amazing work. Kol Tuv v'Hatzlacha. We will talk again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The insights of the political correspondent, analyst for the Israeli news website, The Times of Israel, Haviv Rettig Gur. We're out of time, my friends. My thanks to Sloan Copeland and Serge Goldberg and Tisha Bader. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.